welcome back to Watercolor Tutorials for Absolute Beginners. This series takes beginner watercolor tutorials one step further by assuming you know absolutely nothing. There are no stupid questions here, everybody has to start somewhere. So let's tackle some of the questions. What type of brush or brushes should I be using for watercolor? For beginners, I recommend looking for one that has Taklon bristles, a size 8, 10, or 12 round brush. But why a round brush? I do 95% of all my painting with a single brush. And that's because it has some decent movement in the brush, which is going to allow for some of the watercolor effects, but it's not too floppy where you can't control it. And the unique part about round brushes, if you get one that has a good point, is that you can put a lot of color down, or you can use the tip of the brush to make super fine lines. So you can cover large areas and do detail work with one brush. The other unique thing is that a round brush like this is developed for watercolor. The way the bristles are going to actually hold a reservoir of water, which enables moving more water around the paper. It also has another unique property. Once it's dried off, because there's a reservoir, it almost acts like a little syringe. So you can do things like lift color out using the brush. In order to keep your round brush nice, while you're painting, don't keep it in the water like this. We really only place it in the water to wash it off. The rest of the time, you're just going to take it out of the water and on a rag, in order to dry it off, spin and twist, it'll keep the point nice, and then just lay it flat and leave it like that to dry. Once it's dry, then you can store it upright in a container like this. Watercolor tutorials for absolute beginners. Today I'm going to show you how to paint little fluffy clouds. Actually, we're not exactly going to paint them, we're going to reveal them. For this, you're going to need watercolor, a brush, paper, something to tape it to, and some tape, clean water, and paper towels. Start by taping down your piece of paper. Wet your watercolors to activate them. We want to mix up enough of a blue color to coat the entire page, so put some water in one of these wells. Swirl your brush around in different blue colors, and then mix it into the water you put there. Continue to do that until you like the color blue you have. Before we start painting, I want you to take a piece of paper towel and scrunch it up like this and tear it. Set this to the side where it's easy to get to. Then paint this entire page. Do it quickly and err on the side of too much water. Doesn't need to be a perfect wash. We're gonna be texturing it anyways. While the paint is still wet, I want you to take the torn side and just press it in and lift up. And continue to do this until you've made fluffy little clouds. If it stops picking up the color, one of two things is happening. First, your paper towel might be saturated. You can just tear a little bit off and continue to lift out clouds. The second is your paper might be too dry. And in that case, you can either try again or take your brush, wash it with clean water, and then very lightly, you can place some more of this water down, lightly scrub. Then you can resume lifting out the color. And just like that, we have fluffy clouds. This is actually a technique called lifting, where we can actually lift watercolor off the paper. If you do this technique and it doesn't really lift out the clouds like you expected, one of two things might be happening. The first we can't really do anything about, because your watercolors could just be a really staining type, and that means they won't lift well. But most commonly what I see is somebody will use just too light of a blue, so there's not enough contrast to make it pop like this. Watercolor tutorials for absolute beginners. Yesterday I showed you how to paint these fluffy clouds, and today we're going to be adding mountains to them. You're going to need your watercolors plus 2 mixing wells, whatever you're going to paint on, water, a brush, and I'm using a spray bottle to re-wet my colors and add fresh water to these wells. Step 1, wet your colors. I'm going to put a little bit of water in each of these wells. One of them, I'm going to mix up a really dark purple. Take a clean brush, swish it around in the color you want, and then mix it into the water. Use whatever color you want for this one. Just make sure that the first color you mix up is pretty dark. At least as dark as this, but preferably darker. That's going to work a lot better. Next up, take whatever's in your brush and mix it into the water in the well next to it, and then leave the darker color alone. This is going to make us a lighter version of this color. Then on dry paper, pick up the light color and just make your mountain shapes across the page. Once you bring it down to the bottom, you want to tap your brush off so that it's dry. If you have any standing water, this dry brush will help you suck that extra up. This will help prevent getting backruns. Wait for this to dry or make this dry, because the next layer has to go on a completely dry layer. Wash your brush if you need to, and then dry it off. We're going to use this kind of like a spoon. Spoon a brush full of the darker color into our lighter color. This is going to make a slightly darker version of the previous color. On a dry layer, paint this slightly darker color to make your second layer of mountains. Again, once you get it to the bottom, make sure you dry your brush off and grab any excess water that's accumulating. Then just continue to dry the layer, darken the color, and add as many layers of mountains as you wish. And just like that, if you do these tutorials together, you're gonna have a really beautiful landscape. Watercolor tutorials for absolute beginners. When you're watching a watercolor tutorial, sometimes you'll see an artist dip straight into a pan and then go onto the paper. But sometimes you're gonna see them put their brush into the pan, but then tap their brush off kind of on the side on one of the wells. Why are they doing this? It really has to do with how much control that they want over how much color and water is in their brush. Let's say I'm doing something wet on wet, like making an orange. And for my initial colors, this orange color, I'm just going to drop this in here, and I want a ton of color, and I also want a lot of this to flow around. I don't really need to tap my brush off because I just really want to put a bunch of this pigment in and I just want it to flow around and I'm going to need a lot of it. But I don't want the orange to just be orange. I want there to be some color variation. For example, I might want to put a little bit of yellow into a couple areas, and that I want tighter control over. So I'm going to grab some of this color, tap it off, so I have a better feel for how much of this color is actually in my brush. Then I can be more precise in how much I place down. I'd approach adding a shadow in a similar way. I'd grab the colors I want for my shadow, tap my brush off, and then I can add that in a more controlled manner to my painting. In order to get better color and water control, your best friends are going to be a rag or a paper towel and the side of your palette. Watercolor tutorials for absolute beginners. And today we're going to be doing a fun leaf painting. For this, you're going to need your watercolors, paper, something to tape it to and tape, a round brush, rag or paper towel, and optionally a pen. Start by taping your paper down. You're also going to need patience or a hairdryer or heat gun. We're going to be working in layers. Our first layer, I want you to put some water in one of your wells. So I'm going to start with a light yellow-green color. I just take my damp brush, swirl it around in the colors I want, and then mix it into the water. If you've got a round brush with a nice tip on it, making leaves is really easy. All you need to do is take the tip of your brush and lightly touch it while dragging, and then start to push down on your brush, pulling, and then release the pressure so that it gets smaller towards the end. Drag down the stem. Then on alternating sides, add more of those leaves. Connect it to the center. If your leaves are drying too much while you're doing this, you can just go back in and put a little more color there so it's more even. Once you've got your first layer done, we need to let this dry or make it dry. Once this layer is dry, we want to modify this color to be a little darker. Just taking a damp brush and swirling it around in the colors and then mixing it into that original color. And we're doing another of these on top from a slightly different angle, so I'm actually going to rotate my paper. Overlap the other leaves in certain areas. Depending on how dark your other color is, you're going to be able to see the leaves through or not. Again, let this dry or make this dry. Once this is dry, I'm going to do a third layer. Once everything's dry, a fun optional step is to take a pen, and as long as it's on a dry surface, you can use any pen. I'm just going to imperfectly draw leaf shapes on top of one of these branches and add a couple details. At the end, you're going to be left with this super cute and simple leaf painting.